Underemployed people is another category, and these two count for another 10%. So the focus in this area should be on job search and training programs, activation policy, and well-designed employment subsidies. But this is not only about a first urgent response. This area is also about some reforms that go beyond the current crisis. And there we are back to the problems that existed before the crisis, like aging of the society and global imbalances and environment, which I will speak about in a minute. Aging being one of them. And here the first bullet quotes the title of an OECD publication. It's called Babies and Bosses. And we see that babies and bosses compete for women, particularly for women in the age of around 30 or 30, 40. And this publication takes stock of what can be done in order to bring this competition in to good results and to reconciliation between the two competitors. And of course, we consulted women on what to do best. And here we realize that governments are not entitled to proclaim fertility programs, nor are governments there to intervene in the choices of recruitment that bosses make. But what governments can do and should do is facilitate the choices that mothers and that parents would like to make. And this can be done by providing good childcare, accessible childcare, affordable childcare, temporary work rules, parental leave, a very hot topic here in Australia, as I read in the newspapers, but good to see from both sides of your political spectrum that parental leave will be introduced. Okay, the payment of it can be a discussion, but parental leave will be introduced. And also one of the points is here the taxes, like the recommendation for Australia was to look at the marginal revenues for those who enter the labor market. If these are too low, then the choice is made either for a boss or for a baby. Another recommendation, another area of reform that are driven from aging is that our retirement age should go up beyond 65. So, monsieur, you have to work for a few years longer. And that is also applicable for myself. We are very lucky that we work in kind of jobs where your experience and your expertise helps you to perform. But here, as a former trade unionist, I have to address also the fact that there are a lot of jobs where it is not a pleasure to continue work after 65. And here we have to think about also the agenda to set the competencies for older workers, to maintain them or to help them to build new competence at more or less the age of 40 or 45. And ideally, the construction worker can maybe have some competence also to teach his experience to younger children, to go to the education area. The professor who is in the classroom and cannot do it any longer beyond 60, maybe can benefit from a switch to the area of the police, where he can work on specialized youth cases. And maybe the policeman who cannot do his work anymore can go in construction work. Ideally, this is a shift of things, and it's also, there is a basic truth in it, that there is no such a job that you cannot do at no age. But there is something that we do not always take into account, that one single person cannot do the same job in the same way all his life. So either in your own job you have to maintain, or you have to switch in due time. This is an agenda for reform driven by the aging of our society. Also, we have to consider that employment protection sometimes is too rigid. When employment protection is too rigid, then people will not move, then the costs will go up, then employers will not hire all the workers, etc., etc., etc. So employment protection, paradoxically, does not protect employees all the time. Now, going to the health area, where you also see that aging is an enormous driver for the costs of health, we not only see the aging as a driver for the costs in health, but also the fact that we want more health all the time. In the past, we said, well, it's a fact of life, that health is not always there, and there was a lot of, well, I remember in my youth that religion played a huge role in dealing with health problems, and also in addressing them and accepting bad health or death to a certain extent. Nowadays, we don't do that anymore. We don't accept that. We want more. Health is the single most wanted issues. We want more of health. So the cost will grow, and the technology will continue to bring new opportunities, which is good in itself. So there cannot be any agenda to bring down the cost of health. This is an illusion, and you cannot advise any politician to bring down the cost of health because it's unrealistic and it is not corresponding to the preferences of the voters. And it is not in correspondence with the aging of the society. But we can do some intelligent things, we can do some intelligent reforms, and we are working on that also in the OECD countries. The first thing we can do is we can sort out the so-called non-medical costs. In our health systems, we cover a lot of cost on transportation and on residence. If we sort that out, and if we have other coverages for that, or we have other parties involved, then we can gain a lot. We can also improve in the functioning of gatekeeping, and we can increase the efficiency. We can use technology not only for better healthcare, but also for more transparent administration, etc., etc. So these are areas where we can gain, maybe, but this is to maybe to control the growth of the cost, not to avoid it. Another area where sometimes reforms are discussed, but where in OECD we say handle with care, is migration. We are very positive about migration from a point of economic growth and balancing society. Migration is super. Migration is a driver for growth and is not at all an obstacle. It is also a part of global society with mutual benefits. We see that migrations benefit. We see that recipient countries are benefiting from migrants like yourself, but also that countries that now are donors for migrants, so to say, like Mexico, like a lot of African and Asian countries, benefit a lot from the so-called remittances. Only few people know that remittances in the world are altogether more important than the total official development aid. So what they bring back to their country in that way is even more important. So there is no argument in reducing or restricting migration. This has a lot of mutual benefits. But then we come at the mistakes that we could make. We could say, well, this migration that we have is only temporarily, so we don't make provisions, or we focus only on the high-skilled. This is wrong. All new economic activities for high-skilled come also with activities for low-skilled. And all these countries that said, well, this is only temporary, they have seen that migrants tend to stay. They invest socially, etc. They bring their families, which is good in itself, which can enrich the culture, which can bring a lot of benefit for the recipient country, etc. But then it is important that there is also a so-called integration agenda in which you have a policy in which also these groups can integrate and can have some identity for themselves, but also have to adjust to the general characteristics of a society. This is more an issue for Europe. This is maybe not so much an issue for Australia and New Zealand, I don't know. But on the other hand, we can maybe learn a lot from the migration countries like Australia, New Zealand, Canada, etc. Migration will not be an option, the answer for the aging of society. And the key argument there is, the core argument is that migrants themselves will age in time. And if you would cover up the aging of society with keeping all things unchanged, but bring in migrants to cover up the labor shortages, then you would need a migration of more than a double than it is now, so it's unrealistic, but also migrants will age in time. So this is not a solution for the challenge on the former slide of aging. Migration, some reforms are necessary, but particularly it's necessary to face the reality of migration and to handle with care. Then the human capital is another area of reforms. And the main challenge here is to see human capital not as a cost from a government side, to see education and social investment not as a cost, but as an economic good, so that the money that you invest there is real economic money. And that, of course, can only be done if you also have the accountability, if you have some of a mechanism to measure the outcomes. And there it is important that we develop programs in which we see the outcomes in educational terms, in technical terms, but also in economic terms. And that is a challenge we took up in OECD more or less 10 years ago. And Australia and New Zealand are partners in these programs. It is the program of the International Student Assessment, PISA, the program of International Assessment of Adult Competencies, the PIAC, and the Assessment of Higher Education Learning Outcomes, a new program, the newest, and this is the most contested one, because universities tend to say that their results and their processes never can be compared because they depend on their students and they are so particular, and the university have always their own characteristics and their own history, etc., etc. So their outcomes can never be compared. But of course, the markets do. Students go to one university or another. Teachers go to one university or another. So markets do. So why shouldn't governments and why should not their higher education learning outcomes be assessed in order also to come with some control about how it should be managed, how the programs should be designed, and where the money should go. So this is an offer we say the education area could not refuse. We could see you, yes, as an investment area, but that comes with a lot of accountability, and here we have to develop more programs to measure and to compare. Well, it's also interesting that then, as a result of that, one should design good programs where the incentives are set right. So the incentive in Mexico in the education program was relatively low because a teacher could give his job to his son. So the incentive to do your job well is to produce a child and not to perform well. And here, no, this is reality. We are working now on a program of performance management of education in Mexico. And this performance management is something that also is introduced in other countries. Of course, this will never be perfect, but performance management is key, and you can do that successful with the